Last time, I talked about the problem with the Democratic Party slogan of "Vote Blue no matter who." That video got me thinking more deeply about some inherent problems in America's political system which I briefly mentioned. One of those problems is our very voting system. The system we use is called First Past the Post voting, or FPTP. It's actually quite simple and perhaps the most straightforward and basic form of voting, though that could just be my experience as an American speaking. In this system, the candidate who gets the most votes wins, and note that most doesn't mean over 50%. It just means more than any other individual candidate. Sounds simple, logical, and fair, right? Wrong. If you look under the hood, you'll see a number of problems. The first and most obvious one is that of minority rule. This is where a candidate wins with less than 50% of the votes, since it's more than the amount of votes that any other candidate got. A good example of this is the election of 1912, where Teddy Roosevelt split the Republican vote by forming his own party, thus allowing Woodrow Wilson to win with only 42% of the vote. The second problem is that this necessarily creates a two-party system. In America, 1968 was the last time any party other than the Democrats or Republicans won any states. Essentially, what happens is called tactical voting, where as time goes on, more and more people will vote not for the candidate they like the most, but for the one they dislike the least. You'll often hear people throw around the phrase lesser of two evils when referring to the candidate they're supporting, and that mentality is precisely the core issue here. According to Gallup polls, approximately 40% of Americans are not affiliated with one party or the other, and very few people are actually very supportive of their party. Rather, they're less opposed to their party than the other one. A perfect example of this is libertarians. According to Pew, 11% of Americans identify as libertarian, yet almost all of those people vote Republican, because to many libertarians, the at least theoretically anti-regulationist and small government Republicans, although more socially restrictive, are seen as better than the pro-regulation big government Democrats. People are forced into voting for people they disagree with simply because they disagree with someone else more. Another diametrically opposite but great example is progressives. I haven't been able to find any data on this, but based on how this primary is going, I think it's safe to say that roughly a third of Democrats are progressives, with the rest being moderates, neoliberals, etc. In the words of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in any other country, she and Joe Biden wouldn't be in the same party. Progressives and moderates in the Democratic Party agree on very few things, but progressives know that they have to vote Democrat, because while they might not agree with a moderate candidate, it's seen as better than voting for a conservative Republican. Or at least that's how it was until recently. I have a whole other video about this which you can find a link to in the description, but this leads into the third issue, which is commonly referred to as the spoiler effect. To explain this, I'll refer back to the example I just gave. Let's set up a theoretical scenario where progressive voters are tired of the Democratic establishment and finally make the leap, creating their own party separate from the Democrats. They get somewhere between 10 and 15% of the vote, but because the vast majority of progressives used to be in the Democratic Party, all that happens is that the Democratic vote is split, and the Republicans roll into an easy victory. In fact, this situation is precisely what happened in the aforementioned election of 1912. After this, the same effective tactical voting which led to the two-party system takes place again, and progressive voters fall back in line with the Democrats. Well, if first-past-the-post voting sucks so much, what alternatives are there? Fuck off, Billy, I haven't used you as a narrative device since December. Anyway, while Billy is, or now I guess was, a dumbass with the IQ of a mentally handicapped 2-year-old, he did ask a good question. Well, the first and my personal favorite is called instant runoff voting, also referred to as ranked choice voting, or, literally, alternative voting. This is where voters can rank their candidates in order of preference. If one candidate gets over 50% of the vote, then that candidate wins the election. If no candidate has a clear majority, the candidate with the least votes is eliminated, and the voters who had that candidate as their first choice get their second choice votes counted. This process continues until one candidate has over 50% of the vote. In fact, the state of Maine is going to start using this system this year. There's also a different, although related system, which is actually what most democratic countries use, called the two-round system. In this system, people vote for one candidate, and assuming that no candidate gets over 50% of the vote, all but the top two candidates are eliminated. The people then vote again between these top two candidates. Yet another system is called approval voting, where people vote for as many candidates as they wish and the candidate with the most votes wins. I personally prefer instant runoff voting. While it might still lead to a two-party system, the big advantage that instant runoff has over first past the post is that it gets rid of the spoiler effect, which means that they won't be the same two parties, in America's case, for 168 years. It also eliminates the possibility of minority rule, while still allowing for a good degree of political diversity. It is clear to me, and hopefully now to you, that the current system is broken and stifles the very purpose of our system of government, that being for the voices of the people to be represented in the halls of power. Instead, what we have now is a system which, by its very design, creates stagnation and strangles the idea of political representation. I showed you in this video a few ways that we can fix this, but the problem is that to change the system, any bill or constitutional amendment would have to go through Congress, which is of course interested in maintaining its own power. No such bill would ever pass on its own. There is a way, however. That way is to press your local representative to support such a change. Vote for candidates who support changing our voting system. On the 19th, I was supposed to have interviewed my local congressional representative for my journalism class, and one of my questions was about first past the post, whether he supported it or whether he'd be in favor of repealing it for another system. That interview was unfortunately cancelled because all the schools where I live are closed due to coronavirus, but my point is that it is your job to help fix this broken system. Well, I've said my piece and I won't overstay my welcome. It has been Arkin, thank you for watching, and have a non-infectious day.